Welcome everyone, excuse me. It's already been a long day on a Monday. I'm Connie Ryan. I'm the Executive Director of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, and this is What's Happening. What's Happening is our weekly online forum where we talk with a different guest each week on a variety of subjects, all of which are important in Iowa and in our community. So I'm glad that you have joined us today. As we talk today, if you want to post any comments or questions in the comment section, we will take a look at those and hopefully we will get to any questions by the end of the session. Today we're going to talk about public education and kind of that notion that public education is foundational to our democracy, but there are challenges to that right now in our world and particularly in our nation and state. And I am very pleased to have Mike Beranek with me today. Mike is the president of Iowa State Education Association. You'll hear us say ISEA a lot, I'm sure. And welcome, Mike. Welcome to What's Happening.
Well, thank you, Connie, for inviting me to speak today. And I really appreciate the opportunity. As you've said, there are some interesting things going on regarding public education in our society. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Well, it is always a joy to talk with you and to be partnered with ISEA. We have done a lot of work together over the last many years. So thank you for being with us. So let's dive right in. But I guess before we do that, before we dive into the kind of the politics of it, tell everybody a little bit about you and your teaching career and how you came to this role as president of ISEA.
Well, I sure will. I'm a lifelong resident of Iowa. I grew up down by Riverside, Kelowna, Washington, on a farm. And I attended Iowa State University, where I received 2 degrees, one in child development and one in elementary education. I'm certified to work with children birth through 9th grade, birth through 5 years of age. I could work with children with disabilities. I taught 3rd grade in West Des Moines for 30 years. I call West Des Moines my home, and I have a deep sense of pride in the work that they are accomplishing. And I'm currently serving as president of the Iowa State Education Association. I'm on leave to fill this role. It's a full-time role, and I just started my second 3-year term.
That is awesome, and thank you so much for all that you have done and your teaching and with ISEA. Very much appreciate all of that. Half of my family are educators in one way or the other, so it is near and dear to my heart. So let's now just dive in. And one of the questions that I am interested in from you is there's just a lot happening there. There's mass mandates and challenges around curriculum and funding and just a whole spectrum of things. And we're going to dive into some of those. But if you had to pick one thing that is happening right now that is maybe the biggest impact on public education, what would you, and I know that's hard to do, and it's probably an unfair question, but what would you pick as like the biggest kind of overarching thing that is impacting public education right now?
Oh, that is a tough question. There are so many issues that are affecting public education, but I believe, Connie, in my opinion, the thing that's affecting our public schools is the deep societal divide. Public education, in my opinion, has always been viewed as a place where we educate our entire population of students and that we prepare them to live in a democratic society. And while all of us have had experience with schools, there are folks who are at a point where they're thinking that they may know more than the person who went to school to receive the degree or receive the certification. And because there seems to be this extreme polarization happening, we're finding that those positions are being brought into our Board of Education meetings, into our administrative offices, and into the classrooms. And that has not happened in the past because, in my opinion, everyone on the political spectrum understood the importance of providing a high quality education for our students. And there seems to be a push to bring in personal beliefs and personal desires on what is being discussed and how it's being taught. And we're forgetting that um, Iowa has used our public education system as a recruiting tool to bring in businesses. We're forgetting that in some of our rural areas, our public schools are the major source of economic activity. And so then I could go down into funding and one issue narratives. But I grew up in a state where we understood the importance of providing a high quality education and we allowed our education professionals to make those decisions.
I fully agree with you. It is kind of the overarching of these individual pieces that are really impacting our public schools. And so if you dig down even deeper in that, in the impact on educators, and there's just so much negative environment publicly around public schools and that public narrative. Um, in your experience of, I know you go to a lot of schools, and you hear from teachers across the state, and I want to focus specifically on teachers. How are teachers overall handling this negative environment and this politicization of the place that, for the most part, they love and are dedicated, have dedicated their lives to?
Right. As you know, anyone who's working in our public school system has a desire to be there to help the next generation. And again, Connie, as you know, last year was incredibly hard for our educators, both administrators, classroom teachers, certified personnel, school boards. And folks were hoping that this year would be normal because they wanted to provide a normal experience for their students that come to their classrooms, that walk through the school doors. And unfortunately, that has not been the case for a number of variables that have occurred, whether it be the COVID variant, whether it be the bills that were signed into law last spring, whether it be one issue, folks bringing forward topics which have not been in place before. It has made it a very challenging experience for our folks. But our people who are working in our school buildings are incredibly professional and they are dedicated to helping their students grow and learn and achieve. And so they have been working to synthesize everything that's happening. As you know, Connie, um, everything that's happening in society comes to our schools.
Yep.
And we have our hands open, our arms are open to help those students. But the list over my 30 years has just continued to grow, whether it be providing supplement for food, helping to counsel students with mental health issues, counsel ourselves with mental health issues, addressing the cultural divide that is occurring. And so everything that we see happening on the streets is also happening in our schools. And our educators just keep having more and more stacked on them. And so it can be very frustrating. And there could be parts of those variables which they may not have had the kind of training that they needed to have. I know when I was in school, we didn't talk about the mental health of our students nearly as much as we should. And so I believe that our educators are doing a fantastic job. They want to be there. They want to continue to help our students. But there is a level of frustration which is continuing to grow. And I'll give you an example. Last May, the governor signed a bill at midnight that did not allow for mask mandates in schools. And so at 8 o'clock the next morning, without any warning, every adult who was working in a school system was put on notice that that day when students walked through the door, there was no longer the mask mandate. Well, with 8 or 9 days of school left, can you imagine the level of frustration that occurred when you're trying to prepare your students to end the year, making sure that you've gotten covered what you need to get covered in here? When you walk through the doors, you have a whole new set of issues which you had not been familiar with. And so it's those kind of things that just keep stacking up, which is making the job very, very hard. But as I said, the folks who are working in our schools are doing such a great job. And I have so much respect for everyone who works in our pre-K system through higher ed that I know we'll make it through.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I have family members. Half of my family are educators in some way or another, and I have family members who are administrators in a central office, and principals and teachers. And so, just checking in with them at the end of that day, the stress and the chaos because of one person's decision to upheave everything in our public education system just because she could. And instead of thinking about the whole, anyway, I could preach for a while on that. But I do want to talk.
We need to remember also it was both sides of the House in the
Yeah.
Senate here in Iowa.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just one person, but it was a group of legislators who made that decision.
Yeah, and fully agree, and certainly passing that. When I said one person, just
Oh yeah, no, I get it.
She signed it that night. She could have waited and
Yes.
chose not to. So I do want to talk some about COVID and the health and safety of educators, the health and safety of our students across the state is so critically important. And this issue, which has become so politicized, has really landed at the doorsteps of public schools. And public schools have become even more politicized. And you mentioned school boards earlier. That certainly has been a piece of it. And we've seen that at school board meeting after school board meeting. Why do you think that public schools have really been at the crosshairs of this politicization of the health and safety and COVID and health and safety and public schools? Why public schools has been so much a part of that division?
That's a very good question, and it's kind of a hard one to answer. But we all have had an experience with schooling, as I said earlier, and so folks think that they knew what I was doing as a third grade teacher, or they may be able to do that. And I'm not saying that that's the majority of people, but there is this commonality with the experience base of all of us going through our kindergarten, 12th grade system. And I believe that there are a group of individuals who believe that making changes in our public school system will make long-term changes in our society and the belief systems which we've held so dear since the inception of our country. I mean, it really is my belief that every child born in the United States should receive a free public education, and that public education needs to be the highest quality, and that all of our students should be working together in the same environment and not isolating them because of diversity or because of the way they speak or because of the way they think. And there are situations where folks are viewing the opportunity to affect changes on school boards, to change legislation on the conversations that occur in our classrooms, changing the ability of an educator to teach the truth and understanding the history of our country has the potential to drastically change the kind of programming that we offer in our public schools. And that programming needs to be full encompassing and one that reaches all of our student population and doesn't isolate anyone from learning how to be a good U.S. citizen.
Well, and part of being able to do that from public school to public school to public school is some oversight by the state and benchmarks and standards and those kind of things, but also local control of being able to do to pivot and to do what is best for the students that are in that district, particularly with things like COVID and a pandemic and how it impacts different districts in different ways. But there's lots of reasons for local control. And if I heard it once, I heard it a million times this past session, really the past couple of sessions, of a redefining really of what local control is. We heard time and again, Melissa Peterson, your policy person, lobbyist, can also attest to hearing time and again that local control, the ultimate local control, is the parent. And it's this like redefining of what we have collectively thought about in terms of local control. And so I'm interested how you view local control and kind of from an ISEA standpoint, what local control actually is.
Well, local control is something that we've really been focused on since the signing of the bill last May. We fully believe that our school districts should be afforded the opportunity to make a decision that will be appropriate for their community in terms of keeping their students and employees healthy and safe. And with the signing of this blanket bill that didn't allow for any mask mandating, there are districts in the state that have seen an real pronounced increase in the number of individuals contracting the Delta variant. And prior to the signing of the bill in May, those districts were able to make the decisions according to the scientific data that was presented to them to keep everyone healthy. Before that bill was signed last spring, Connie, we had over 80% of our school districts in Iowa that had made the decision for wearing mask mandates. And there were options for individuals who chose not to do that, whether it be a hybrid model or it be online learning or even homeschooling with participation with the district. But once that was ripped away from the community, they were not able to make the decisions which may have been appropriate. And as you've seen, Connie, the number of students children that are 12 years or younger who've contracted the virus and who are ending up in our hospitals has increased dramatically since last year. And if you remember, last fall, we had a huge breakout after Halloween. There were schools that shut down for 2 weeks and went to all virtual because of the lack of physical distancing outside the school. And so making sure that our children are educated takes the involvement of 3 different levels. One would be the federal government to make sure that students who are working under an IEP, an individualized education plan, or 504, those kind of regulations are followed through Title I funding. The state plays an incredible important role with making sure that folks are teaching the standards which have been adopted through a mutual conversation, but then also local control in terms of class sizes and building upgrades, since it's ventilation systems, HVAC systems, to just wearing a mask. We've seen an increase here since the injunction a few weeks ago of the number of districts that have implemented face masks. And as of last Thursday, I've not seen the data today, but we had about 150,000 children that were going to schools where these decisions have been made. And so those were decisions that needed to be made at the local level. And so local control needs to be fundamental. And the way we help implement that is by electing individuals to our boards of education, to our school boards, who are going to make decisions for the entire population, for the entire community. And making sure that we elect individuals who understand financing, who understand building and remodeling plans, who understand the needs of the entire system, because they need to make decisions on a whole litany of topics. And us as citizens need to be having deep conversations with anyone who's choosing to run for a school board position, and ask them what their beliefs are. Ask them how they're going to help every child across the socioeconomic spectrum, how we're going to uplift our children to be as successful as they can possibly be, and to help them be prepared for employment in Iowa and stay in Iowa, and want to contribute to our economic system and our belief system. And so it really is important for all of us to engage with the policymakers, and the policymakers at the local level or the school board.
I want to kind of continue down this path a little bit further, Mike. And Interfaith Alliance of Iowa was started after a school board election in 1995, and it was a battle with the religious right, really. And a sitting school board member was ousted because of his sexuality. And we know that the religious right began in conversations in the 70s, and I'm speaking nationally, continued in the 80s and 90s. Obviously, it still has power now. But in the 80s and 90s, they were very much focused on school boards and getting folks on school boards to be able to carry out their agenda. And also to use that as a platform then to step up into higher offices. This time right now feels a little bit, feels a lot, let's just be honest, feels a lot like that period of time where a particular political agenda pushed by some national groups of getting school board candidates to carry out that agenda at that very local level that impacts the education of all of our kids. And just your thoughts on that. School board elections are critically important, and sometimes they are ignored by the most of voters, and turnout by voters is very small proportionally. And so I'm concerned about this movement that we are seeing, and extreme candidates that are one issue candidates or two issue candidates. Mass is certainly part of that, but also race and racism often is folded into that. And your thoughts on that from a person who has worked in the system and understands the importance of school boards at the local level?
Well, I think the one thing that folks like yourself and me and other activists in Iowa need to help our general population understand is that our schools are political playgrounds. They are controlled by politics. It did not used to be that case so much years ago, but I represent educators. I've worked with a number of parents who don't understand what role politics plays in the everyday educational system of their students. People like to say, well, representatives here in Iowa who represent public education shouldn't be as involved in politics. Well, we're seeing two direct correlations with involvement in politics last spring with the bill signing of the divisive concepts and the no mask mandate. And that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of funding and hiring and licensure and all of that. And so I think that, yes, there are individuals who really strive to provide their own interests, their own opinions, and drive one or two narratives, whatever it is, over the course of history. We could go way back to segregation. And so there is a system developed where this is a tool for some folks to achieve their goals. And as you said, Connie, school board elections have always been very low turnout here in Iowa. One, because there have not been such hotly contested seats over the years. And two, the assumption has always been made that people who are running for school board elections will understand how to make the system work for everyone in the system. And I think we need to step back from that. We need to be encouraging our neighbors, our family members, anyone that we come in contact with, to be talking to our school board candidates and then showing up at the polls and voting. Um, we need to make sure that we have good representation by all of our community at the polls so we can help choose those elected officials who will make the appropriate decisions. But you are absolutely right. There have been opportunities over the years for specific narratives to be brought up during elections and then in meetings and school boards. But prior, we've typically had the majority of individuals who understood what their role was for the entire system. Um, and so this is a very important year, Connie, in terms of our school board elections. And whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican, you need to go to the polls. But you need to be talking to those folks that you're going to be voting for. And remember that they're not only educating your child, or helping to educate your child, but they're educating the people down the street or across town. And we need someone who represents all of them.
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to take a little bit of a right turn, left turn, whatever. I don't mean that politically. A different topic, I guess. And so you mentioned the Divisive Concepts Bill. We saw quite a number of bills this year in the legislature. The bill banning teaching of the 1619 project, and just a variety of legislation that really was limiting of schools and teachers on issues of race and racism. So there is legitimacy in being inclusive of our teaching to include issues of race and racism in certain subject matter, and certainly at the appropriateness of different ages and grades of how you do that. How do I think there was a misunderstanding of what the Divisive Concepts Bill actually did, and it never did mention critical race theory. That was thrown into the mix after the fact and in the signing of the bill. And there's also a misunderstanding what critical race theory is, but we don't need to go there. But we did that program actually last year, so folks can look at that, or earlier this year, I guess. Anyway, how do teachers talk about race and racism and inclusivity and addressing systemic issues, whether it's in education or in other systems, while all of this controversy is swirling around them, and the impact of that controversy in their schoolrooms, and as you said, everything out here impacts schools as well. So how is that, should that be taught, I guess, is the first question, and or included, and how do you do that to the benefit of the students?
Well, we do that by teaching the truth. And we have documented historical events that have occurred over humans' existence here on Earth. And we need to provide that information to our students and then help them think about what they've just learned and critically analyze the data put before them so they can make future decisions which do not replicate what has happened in the past. You are absolutely correct. When the divisive bill was signed into law last year, that sent quite a message to our folks before they actually read the bill. And upon reading that bill, people are finding that they can continue to teach the things that need to be taught. I think the biggest concern of the folks who crafted that bill was that a Mike Beranek would be injecting his belief system into the classroom. And I don't believe that occurred in very many places across the state. I believe that teachers were working very hard to help their students know what had happened. And I'll give you an example. In my classroom, we worked on understanding how slavery didn't just start during the 1500s of the slave trade route. It goes way back to when we were roaming the planet looking for food. And so I helped my students understand that this just wasn't a human system that was developed by a group of individuals at a certain point in our history. And so we worked through all of that. We identified how the Quakers were instrumental in helping with the Underground Railroad. And why were they instrumental in that? And we then brought in Martin Luther King, and not only talking about Martin Luther King, but we fully understood who Gandhi was and his intent on nonviolent direct action. And to this day, Connie, I have students who are adults who come back to me and talk about the importance of understanding what nonviolent direct action is and activism in making sure that our society continues to move forward. But blended in with that was a discussion about the Trail of Tears, the women's right, winning the right to vote. And all of those are points in our history which have made contributions. And I wanted the children who walked out of my third grade classroom to be able to contribute to society for the whole of society. And that is what my belief is happening in our schools. I never put on my own opinion on whether women should vote or not vote, but I presented the information that they needed to have before them. And then they could sit back and they could understand the various stakeholders in our system called the United States of America and understand what the unintended consequences, yes, we learned about Sengi, understand the unintended consequences of making decisions and what an iceberg was and how something that happens at the top, there are all this underlying currents. And if we have to provide those opportunities for our students to be able to think. We wanted the individuals who signed our Constitution, who crafted the Bill of Rights, we wanted them to think. That's what we want these kids coming out of our schools to be able to do now. So I'm sorry, this is a very long-winded answer, but I'm very passionate about this. So what I think is happening is that our educators stepped back, took a pause, thought about what the legislation meant when they saw it, and then are moving forward to make sure that their students are learning the truth and that there is nothing hidden or pulled off the table or not discussed, and not to change anyone's mind, but just to allow the children to make decisions for themselves.
And to provide that education, that grounding of those issues that are so critically important. I think that I would like to be one of your third graders at some point in time. So maybe we can like have a little classroom session, because that is amazing. And not to criticize my third grade teacher, but I think I would have learned a lot more in your classroom.
Each teacher provides certain qualities. Lord knows I was probably crazy and nuts, and so
we all have our skills. I want to shift a little bit again. I'm kind of taking a little bit of a path here, but to funding. And we know that public schools have been underfunded for many, many years, and particularly under the Republican leadership over the last decade. And so, how does that I'm worried about the impact of that layering of underfunding over underfunding each year, and the impact on public schools across our state, whether that is the largest district of Des Moines or the smallest district of whatever that district might be. I should find that out. Um, and so talk about funding and the underfunding and that layering effect of on our public schools.
Um, well, funding is incredibly important for all of our systems here in Iowa. And as you mentioned, the trend line is down over the past 15, 20 years. We were fully committed here in Iowa. It was a nonpartisan issue. Both sides of the aisle supported public education. And we provided the appropriate funding for that to occur. But it has been reduced and minimized. And it has drastic consequences in terms of class size, what kind of buildings we have in our systems, what kind of programming that are available. Just a side note, with the gutting of collective bargaining back in 2017, the unintended consequence of that was creating systems around our state that are no longer systems that new hires or employees want to go through. They're seeking destination school districts that have maintained contractual rights. And I don't mean to go down that path, but every decision that we make regarding funding has a consequence, whether it's intended or unintended. We need to reinvest in how we are providing funding for our schools. And that includes the kind of materials that we purchase to teach with, being able to afford the best programming that we can, providing high quality programming. Not every student is going to be good at one particular area. And so there are systems that provide a large selection of class opportunities, which are class subject areas that are opportunities for students to find their niche and grow and learn and feel great about being part of our system. We need to provide the appropriate funding to have the best educators wanting to come to Iowa and work in our schools. Connie, there are places across the state that cannot find paraprofessionals, individuals who are working side by side with students because their starting salary is so low that they end up having to give their entire paycheck back to the district for their health insurance. No one should be working in our school systems that can't take home a paycheck and receive the services and benefits that requires to keep their family healthy and safe. And so also making sure that we are providing funding to hire the best administrators that we can. No school system is successful with just classroom teachers and paraprofessionals. And we need to understand what the entire system requires for funding streams, and we need to reinvest in what it is that we provide our students here in the state of Iowa. As I started out with, Iowa has always had a long tradition, proud history of having the best education in the country. We still have some of the best education in the system or in the country with our graduation rate. There was something that just came out with a particular testing protocol that Iowa was at the top. But we are also finding that there are educators who live closer to other states that are choosing to leave the state. Are other opportunities for them there. We're also finding that there are teacher shortages across the state because districts don't have the funding stream in order to pay the salaries to keep those folks in that community. There are individuals who are choosing not to go into public education because they're looking at the contracts that are offered. They're looking at the public narrative that is questioning what they're going to be teaching. They are looking at the societal issues that are coming into our classrooms, and they're thinking, well, this is something I really need to think strongly about before I finish a 4-year program in education. Um, our regions need to make, our higher ed institutions need to receive the funding that's appropriate to provide high quality education for the people who are going to be providing high quality education for our students. And so this is another issue that I think all of our citizenry needs to address. And that is, what do we believe is our commitment to our future? What is the commitment that we have in ensuring that the United States of America is here another 200 and some years into the future? And public education is that the foundation of that commitment. And in order to have a high quality public education, we need to have the funding resources which are necessary to provide that programming.
Which takes us right back to the very beginning of where we started, and that public education is foundational to our democracy. I fully agree with you. And it is being chipped away. Pieces of that foundation are being chipped away, whether there is funding, whether it is the impact of the negative narrative that is happening in the public square about public schools and teachers, et cetera, whether it is the legislation that we are seeing time and time again that really kind of puts into question the ability of teachers to teach appropriately, which is what we saw with the divisive concepts bill. Really, it was, in my opinion, was questioning the integrity of teachers being able to teach what was necessary and appropriate. So how do we, this is kind of like one of those big esoteric questions, but how do we get ourselves out of this, Mike? Like, how do we move forward and put back into place? I'm not a believer of being Pollyanna-ish about history and all of that, but we have moved to a place where it is putting our public education system and therefore our students and their future in jeopardy. How do we get ourselves out of this?
That's a huge question.
Right?
Well, it is my fundamental belief that relationships and communication are fundamental in order to make any decision. And over the course of our history here in Iowa, there has been strong cooperation, collaboration, and relationship building in regards to public education. We may all have different opinions on one issue or another when it comes down to the entire state, but public education was always a cornerstone where everyone could have a conversation, maybe have a difference of opinion on X, Y, or Z, but there was always common ground to be found. Common ground does not seem to be sought right now. And as I went way back to the beginning, the societal divide is what's hurting the entire thing. And people are unwilling to sit down and have a conversation about a particular topic. And we're seeing that play out in our Board of Education school board meetings currently. There is a huge negative swirling conversation happening at some of our school boards. And we've never seen that before. And we've all benefited from our prior experience with relationships, communication, and collaboration. I'm worried that we need to refocus on that. I know we need to refocus on it. I'm worried that some folks are not going to be able to do that. But we need to make sure. I know I'm saying a lot of we needs, and I apologize for that. There is something to be said for a highly educated workforce. And I'm not saying that every individual in our state needs to be going to a 2-year or 4-year program. There are folks who are entering our workforce that may just have a high school degree. Do I think they need at least a 2-year associate's? Yes. But we want people to be educated and ask the questions in order to make the correct decisions. And if we're not providing a high quality education for our students, they're not prepared to be able to critically analyze how their lives are working, how the lives of their families are working, and what changes need to be made. And so It is fundamentally important that we provide a high quality education here in the state that allows, I'm going to say it again, every student to participate in a democratic society. And
in our public schools and our public education system. I will note that in the comments that I know you can't see, Lizzie Gilman from West Des Moines says, Western Hills misses you. Thanks for the important work you do, Mr. B. And I know that you are known by many far and wide as Mr. B. So
yes,
I just wanted you to know there was a lot of love out there. Mike Beranek, Mr. B, thank you so much for joining me today and for this amazing conversation. I am grateful, as I said, for all that you do and for your work on behalf of public schools, but even more importantly, for on behalf of all of the children in our state to receive a solid, good public education in the state of Iowa. So thank you for all that you do. For those that you are that are watching, thank you so much for being with us today. Or if you're watching the recording, thank you also. We appreciate you and that you have joined us. If you're new to Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, you can find out more about our work at interfaithallianceiowa.org. You can, of course, find us on Facebook and YouTube, but also on Instagram and Twitter. Mr. B, Mike, thank you so much again.
can I just say one thing, Ms. Ryan? Connie, please tell your staff and that we appreciate all the work that you're doing at Interfaith Alliance of Iowa. And under your leadership, your organization truly has tackled some of the most important issues occurring in our society today. And the work that you do is phenomenal. You bring the voices to the table of so many that don't have a voice. I personally really appreciate how you are helping to make sure that everyone is heard here in Iowa and that we think about the entire system of Iowa. And so God love you. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, Mike. I truly appreciate that. Thank you. I have been closing each of these sessions this year by saying to please register to vote. If you are already registered to vote, then please help somebody else register. And please do vote this November in the local elections that will be coming to a precinct near you. And that is the first Tuesday in November. It is critically important that everybody be part of the process. And so in the meantime, if you will, I wish for you just to stay safe and take care and have a great week. Thank you, everyone.